Hello and welcome to Ruben Uncut. Today's topic, I'm going to rank every DC movie that was released in theaters. Now, I'm going to specify, actually, there's a couple caveats I need to make the list. I need to make here, but let me just say, I recently read an article from, I think it was like Wham Bam Pow Comics or something, some website that gives a shit about comic book movies. But the point is that I hated their list a lot. So I made my own, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. Is I'm going to rank every every major DC movie. Now, this list is primarily going to consist of movies that were released in theaters. There are two exceptions because I did include two director's cuts separately because they are different enough to justify them as being, well, better versions of the movie than the one that was released in theaters, and I felt that this made them worthy enough to put on the list. Now, there are a couple of movies that did have extended cuts released that I actually do recommend over the theatrical cut, but these extensions of these movies are not enough to fundamentally change the films, and I'll point these out as we go along. But the point is if you like DC characters, strap in. I'm going to share my thoughts on all the major released DC movies. This will not include this will not include any movies that went straight to DVD that are not attached to a bigger movie, essentially. Starting off the list, the very bottom, with the very worst movie that DC has put out. We got to go with the theatrical cut of Justice League. Now, I'll be honest here. If this movie wouldn't be so low on the list if I hadn't seen the director's cut of the movie. Because even though the theatrical cut is bad on its own, its true awfulness cannot actually be revealed unless you know what has been changed. And the truth is that Joss Whedon's cut, which is what we should recognize it as, even though it is still a movie credited to Zack Snyder, Joss Whedon's cut is horrendous. Now, when I first saw this movie, I was taken in by it because I was emotionally invested in the DCEU universe, and I was ready to see this film. However, upon repeat viewings and then seeing the director's cut, several things are very clear about this movie. One of which is that the theatrical cut of the film is essentially just a series of bland talking head exposition scenes spliced together with mutilated action sequences and a bunch of jokes that Joss Whedon basically recycled from his other movies. Some of the jokes are also hugely distasteful, like landing in Wonder Woman's boobs, or, of course, this one joke where essentially Joss Whedon kills off a woman just to set up a punchline. And that's what the movie's like. Then there's also the racism of the film. A big key example of this is that in the Snyder Cut, we're told that all the armies of man, which include a Germanic-looking army, an Asian-looking army, and a Nubian or African-looking army, are all involved in the flashback sequence fighting young Darkseid. Now, the thing about that sequence is that in the theatrical cut here, you only see the Germanic army. Joss Whedon, for whatever reason, cut out the Asian and African armies. It's a weird choice, especially since it needs less than like 10 seconds of movie to establish it. So, like, what is that? Moving on to number 42, Catwoman. Catwoman is a movie that's on this list that I have to say is so bad, it might be worth watching for how bad it is. This film is a goddamn fever dream of a film. I mean, my God, this movie so like the movie is like if you described all the tropes of a superhero movie to a director who's never seen a superhero movie, then he tried to recreate all those tropes with zero understanding of the character or the comic book they were supposed to be adapting, and also that English isn't their first language because they're French. This movie was directed by a guy named Pitoff, who, by the way, other major credit is being a second unit director on Alien Resurrection. They gave the second unit director of Alien Resurrection $100 million to make a movie starring Halle Berry. Now, this is normally a sign that the studio wanted someone who was easily controlled. But still, like, damn. This movie is wild and also disrespectfully takes place in the Michael Keaton universe, which we know because A, there's an image of Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman in a still image in the film, but also Halle Berry's Catwoman gets her powers the same way that Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman gets her powers, which is where she dies, and then a whole bunch of cats essentially resurrect her. And then she comes back as Catwoman. Whether Halle Berry has 9 lives or not is never told to us in the film, but man, is it weird, including a scene where a basketball scene between Halle Berry and the male love interest that essentially is just them using basketball as foreplay in front of like a whole crowd of 12-year-old boys who were previously playing basketball. It's a weird movie. It's honestly so bad, it might be worth watching for how bad it is. It's that kind of bad. Next up, Jonah Hex at 41. This movie is also pretty freaking bad. And the story behind this one is weird. Essentially, for some reason, Warner Brothers was like, you know who should direct the Jonah Hex movie? Let's get that Taylor and Neveldine guys. You know, the guys who did the Crank movies and Gamer. I think that they are the perfect kind of weird to do Jonah Hex. So in come Taylor and Neveldine, and they do a treatment for the movie. And after writing the treatment, they're both like, you know what? This movie's not for us. At which point, the studio continues along with the movie, gets a new director and writer, then fires that director, replaces him with another director, who then proceeds to rewrite the majority of the 80-minute movie. It's like 80-something minutes long. It's not long at all. And then, on top of this, the thing is that Warner Brothers at some point must have said to these directors, make sure you make it look like a Taylor and Neveldine movie, because the movie is blatantly trying to rip off Taylor and Neveldine's style, only not done as cleanly as them. I don't know how to describe it, but it's like, it looks like the cheap version of what they do, and I don't know if you can say what they do is that expensive looking. It's a bad movie. This is also another movie where, like, essentially a whole bunch of people are like, yeah, it's not the movie we worked on. Josh Brolin also made a pitch for this movie, and his pitch of the movie was just a more traditional cowboy movie starring a guy with a messed up face. That probably would have been cheaper to make too, Warner Brothers. You really dropped the ball here. Number 40, Batman and Robin. I hate this movie. This was the first movie I ever truly hated. I was a huge Batman fan when this movie came out. Like, I had gotten hardcore into Batman around 1997. 1996, 1997, this general area. I have a t-shirt of this movie that I got before this movie came out when I was in Hollywood with my dad. Side note, in Hollywood, they get merch for movies that haven't come out yet, like way in advance. Weird. I hated this movie. It's ugly. It's stupid. It has a career low performance from George Clooney, who is literally just George Clooney in a Batman costume the whole freaking movie, and it's terrible. Like, Poison Ivy is sexy, but in like a clearly this is a woman who is being sexualized by a gay man kind of way. I don't know how else to describe how it comes off in the movie. That's how, like, so if you see the movie, you might understand what I mean by that. And then it's got Robin in a Nightwing costume, but it's still called Batman and Robin. And then worst of all, to me at the time, I had just read the novelization of the story Batman Nightfall, and I had gotten huge into Bane. I was obsessed with Bane. He is one of my top one of my top Batman villains, to be completely honest, because I read this book when I was a kid. And this movie's disrespectful portrayal of him angered me to no end. I hate this movie. It has its fans, if you can tolerate how campy it is, and ugly, and stupid. I hate this movie. The Return of Swamp Thing is number 39. It's not a good movie. It's not, despite being stupid and campy and attempting to be fun, it's very forgettable. The only thing that is worth noting about The Return of Swamp Thing is that it is a huge step down from the Wes Craven Swamp Thing in almost every way except the costume. Swamp Thing's costume is way better in The Return of Swamp Thing. Like, it is comic book accurate. Like, holy shit, that's their costume for him? That's fucking on point. Which is a shame because the other one's a better movie and the costume is trash. Next up, Steel. Honestly, it's not a good movie. There's so many things that are wrong with it. But, like, it's kind of a charmingly bad movie. Like, there is actually, like, one good scene in the movie where the police are trying to get a bunch of civilians to identify Steel. And even though they all recognize him, they refuse to identify him because they respected him as a hero and he saved their lives. It's a nice moment in a movie that is, generally speaking, stupid and not well made and dramatically under budget for the time period it was made in. This movie is from 1997. Side note, 1997, terrible year for comic book movies. The best comic book movie that came out in 1997 was Spawn, if that tells you anything. Like, because its competition were literally Batman and Robin and Steel. And they were worse. Steel, the movie is too self-aware of Shaquille O'Neal and the fact that it also stars Richard Roundtree. The movie just has too many, hey, he's Shaq jokes, or hey, he's Richard Roundtree, he played Shaft jokes throughout it. And also, he doesn't fly, which is weird because in the comics, Steel can fly. He's like, he's literally black working class Tony Stark. And that's not how it comes across here. Also, he, for some reason, has super strength when he's not in the costume, and it's never explained. Another thing that holds the movie back from being good is that the action scenes are genuinely not good, especially for its time period. Like, they wouldn't be on point even in the 80s action scene wise. I did find the movie surprisingly charming, but it is horrifically flawed, especially if you're going to it as a Steel movie. Number 37, Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. The problem with The Quest for Peace is that it is cheap. It is a cheap movie, but it's also a great way to look at. It's a great example of understanding how the Christopher Reeves movies deteriorated over time. You see, compared to the original Richard Donner movie, this is peak, like, Superman silliness and camp. The movie tries really hard to rectify some of the mistakes of Superman 3, and it tries really hard to make sure it's part of the Superman movie mythos. And I respect that. But it's also cheap. It feels like it's missing crucial scenes, and it's dumb and campy as hell. In the first Richard Donner movie, we meet Lex Luthor and his sidekick. When we first meet them, they literally murder 2 police officers by pushing them in front of a subway. In this movie, we see John Cryer show up as Lex Luthor's nephew and essentially trick these chain gang prison guys into his car that then drives over an edge and blows up. And those guys both live. You see that as the Christopher Reeves movies go on, they just become sillier and more cartoonish. And it deteriorates into this camp, which is the cycle of franchises, by the way. You start off by taking the material seriously, and then you make it campy until the campiness eventually kills the franchise, and then you got to reboot back to dark and gritty, and it starts all over. Which brings us to Batman Forever. Warner Brothers. Oh, did I mention that Batman and Robin was largely an action figure commercial? And the difference between Batman and Robin and Batman Forever when it comes to Joel Schumacher is that when Joel Schumacher made Batman Forever, he didn't know it was supposed to be a toy commercial, which is why Warner Brothers made him change his movie to be more of a toy commercial and cut out some of the darkness that he had put in there. And honestly, I just think this movie is hideous. Batman Forever has some of the worst aging CGI I've ever fucking seen. It's ugly. It like most of Gotham is CGI, and I hate it. Also, Tommy Lee Jones he neither plays Two-Face well, nor is he written like Two-Face very much. I will say that Drew Barrymore is hot in this movie. That's what it's got. That's the major thing it's got going for it. Jim Carrey's okay. Val Kilmer, not the best Batman, but he was better than George Clooney. This next one, people are going to call blasphemous. But yeah, no. The theatrical cut of Superman 2 is number 35 for me. Fuck that movie. All right, so full honesty. As a child, Superman 2 was my favorite. Like, favorite Superman movie. Loved it. And that makes sense. As a kid, it's all about the action. It's all about the fight scenes between Superman and Zod and all of them. And like as a kid, like you don't know science, so you can't stop to think about how stupid this movie fucking is. Because like we live in a time where people like just blatantly deny science. And maybe it's because they grew up watching movies like Superman 2, where science is a clear afterthought. Like, how are these people talking on the moon? Like, all that kind of shit. This movie's full of it. Also, it's the Richard Lester cut. And the Richard Lester cut is trash. I'm sorry, but the Richard Lester cut of Superman 2 is trash. It's got a bunch of jokes it doesn't need. He adds weird powers. The ending sucks. He fucking murders Zod in this version. No one talks about that. Now, technically, he murders him in the Richard Donner cut also, but in the Richard Donner cut, he also... Well, we'll get to that in a minute. I think that this movie has aged absolutely terribly. I think it has aged like milk in the sun for 100 years. It looks bad. It's written bad. It has aged poorly. But like I said, as a kid, this was my favorite. But as an adult, I'm like, wow, this fucking thing. Oh, also there's a scene where he like goes back to get brutal revenge. Like Superman actively chooses to get brutal revenge on some nobody trucker who beat up Clark Kent. And yet people complain about Snyder's Superman vision. Mind-boggling. Next, 34, Green Lantern. Honestly, I thought this movie almost worked. It almost works. This is the DC movie that tried the hardest to be an MCU movie. It honestly is. There's so much MCU in the DNA of this movie. It's ridiculous. It also got Taika Waititi playing, checks notes, an Eskimo. That doesn't seem right. But anyways, this movie almost works. Except it cost way too much to make. The final act has some terrible CGI in it. And I do recommend watching the extended cut because the extended cut has 9 minutes of character development that this movie could have really used. The movie also has a bunch of things it has in it that just don't go anywhere. Like, there's a scene where we're introduced to his nephew, and like, why? That literally doesn't go anywhere. That nephew, we never see that nephew again. That nephew's never in danger. I mean, like, hypothetically, the whole planet's in danger. But like, the point is like we're introduced to this character, and it just they're meaningless to the plot of the movie. And the third act is just bad. The third act is bad. Also, it's got a skinny Amanda Waller, and I mean, she's a great actor who plays her, but like, I prefer more full-figured Amanda Waller. Next up, the Supergirl movie. This movie is out there. First, I'll start with the positive. This movie tries really hard to tie itself into the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, and actually, I think it does a good job at that. That being said, the movie's weird as fuck. It's literally a story about this teenage alien girl who comes to Earth, and she's like 16, and this witch, a witch, puts this spell on a full-grown man gardener so that he falls in love with this girl, which is weird, for several reasons. One, it is a spell, and two, he's like at least 28. Um, but yeah, the movie itself is almost worth watching for just how weird it is. But I have to be honest, it's not great. If you are gonna watch it though, you need to watch the 2-hour cut, which is the one they have on HBO Max. Oh wait, I'm sorry, just Max. It was such a dumb decision there, Discovery. But that version is the 2-hour cut. There is a 90-minute cut, which was the original released cut. And I have to say, don't watch that cut. This movie barely makes sense with 2 hours. I cannot imagine how incomprehensible it would be in an hour and a half. Next up, Swamp Thing, which I ranked pretty low. I will be honest here. I enjoy most of this movie's on a certain level. But Swamp Thing is where we're going to start to see the turn into better DC movies, kind of. So the thing about Swamp Thing is that it is the better Swamp Thing movie. It's made by Wes Craven. It's not super scary, but Wes Craven does the source material some type of justice in terms of, well, the actual story. However, the weird trade-off between the two Swamp Thing movies is that his costume is fucking trash in this one. In fact, it's the major thing holding this movie back is that his costume is bad. Like, it's like, oh, is he wearing a rubber diving suit? What the fuck is that? Like, the one thing Return of Swamp Thing gets right is the costume. And the one thing that Wes Craven's Swamp Thing fucks up is the costume. I'm going to guess for budgetary reasons. Well, at least with Return of Swamp Thing, they knew where the budget needed to go, making Swamp Thing look at least as good as the TV show version of Swamp Thing. By the way, same actor played Swamp Thing in both of these and the live-action TV show. So that's fun. Next up, Superman 3. Yes, I ranked Superman 3 above the theatrical cut of Superman 2. Why? Because even though Superman 3 is stupid and a lot of its humor fails, it is at least consistent. Like, that's the thing, is that Superman 2 is a mishmash, like, Frankenstein creature of between Donner's image and Richard Lester's vision for the film. Superman 3 is at least all Richard Lester. That being said, it's not spectacular. Seriously, like, by the time this movie was over, I wanted someone to kill Jimmy Olsen. That's how fucking annoying he is in this movie. That being said, the other thing about Superman, the best thing about Superman 3 is that its villain is more Lex Luthor than Gene Hackman's villain is Lex Luthor. Sorry, Gene Hackman, it's not your fault. It's the way you were written. Like, why the fuck is Lex Luthor always trying to do these, like, land deals? It's not Lex Luthor-y at all. Number 30, Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut. Yeah, I know, it's not that far removed from the from Superman 2. Like I said, as an adult, I now recognize that the first part of that Superman 1 is the best of the Christopher Reeve Superman movies. It's very artistic. Superman 2 is not that much smarter than the theatrical cut of Superman 2. Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut, though, has arguably a better ending because he does not erase Lois Lane's memory. And he does not have some of the weird, stupid powers. And a bunch of the bad jokes aren't in here. But it does still have a lot of the same elements, Superman 2 that have not aged well. Things like its disregard for science is still there. Superman in this movie also ends with him flying backwards around the world to reverse time, which once again doesn't make sense. And extra doesn't make sense because it somehow also affects time in space, because it makes it so Zod never came to Earth. Now, in this cut, he does actually still kill Zod in that scene where they take their powers, but it matters less because Superman just reverses time so that Zod is still in the Phantom Zone instead of dead, which does make him the less murdery version. It doesn't make any of that make any more sense. Like, how does the Earth going backwards affect time in outer space? That nonsense, really. It's still the better version of the movie. Oh, but he still gets revenge on the truck driver, except in this one it's actually even weirder because technically, since he reversed time, the truck driver never beat up Clark Kent, and only Superman remembers that happened. So when he goes back and brutally assaults the truck driver, it's extra weird because technically the only one who remembers those events is Superman. So he just goes there and beats the shit out of this guy who has no idea who he is. And audiences were still angrier that Henry Cavill's Superman crucified that sex pest's semi-truck. I don't understand audiences, and I don't understand Superman fans. You guys don't make sense. Number 29, Shazam! Fury of the Gods. Movie has some fun parts. And because of who directed it, whose name is escaping me right now, it also has some surprisingly dark parts. Overall, the action is better than in the first Shazam movie, but the story is not as good. It's okay. It has its moments. But the emotional core of the first movie is just stronger, and the emotional core of this movie feels annoying. This is also before everyone realized that Zachary Levi is a guy who cannot stop shooting off his mouth for 10 minutes. Yeah. So, and also, like, in this movie, it's even more noticeable that the kid who plays Billy Batson seems more mature than Zachary Levi's Shazam, which is weird. It still has some decent action, and it's all right. It has a heavy case of sequelitis, though. Not a bad time, but also not incredible or essential in any way. Next up, Wonder Woman 1984 at number 28. Too bad it's not 84 of these. It would have been funny to rank it at number 84, even though it would definitely be better than that. Wonder Woman 1984 is a movie I need to rewatch, and that rewatch may lower or raise its place on this list. When I watched Wonder Woman 1984, there are a couple things that should be stated. When I watched this movie the first time, I was going through a lot emotionally, and also I was tripping balls. Like, hardcore tripping balls when I watched this movie, because it looked like it was going to have a lot of color in it. And when the movie got to the final scene where Maxwell Lord this is a big spoiler, where Maxwell Lord is admitting to his kid that he's a liar and a piece of shit, that scene broke me. Like, I cried like a goddamn baby at that scene. It hit me in the weird dad feels. And like, I can't just walk away from the fact that a movie impacted me that way, like emotionally. Like, that means the movie did something right, regardless of how high and depressed I was at the time. That being said, I do need to rewatch it because the movie also has a lot of problems. First of all, it is unnecessarily campy. Like, the thing is the first movie has a very, like, well-regulated tone with humor and drama, and this movie does not. In fact, the thing I don't understand about Wonder Woman 1984 is why you would make a movie that is an homage to the worst Christopher Reeve Superman movies. Specifically, this is an homage to Richard Lester's Superman movies. Like, that's what it is. It's an homage to those, and it's like, why? Who made that choice? Wonder Woman didn't need to take a Thor Ragnarok style turn. That wasn't a thing its franchise needed, which is why people reacted negatively to the sudden infusion of 1980s camp. And the 1980s camp is kind of aggressive and annoying. Although I will say, I give this movie major props for deciding to have Hans Zimmer make the score instead of just pumping it full of bullshit 80s music I don't want to hear. That's what we have Stranger Things for, people. Number 27, the 1966 Adam West Batman movie. This is just fun. I'll be honest, like, almost all the movies from this point on, I like to some extent. So everything from here on is like, okay to great. It is good stuff to great. 1966 Batman movie is a fun ride. It's not particularly deep or interesting in any serious manner, but, you know, it does nicely capture that era of Batman. It's a good time. Next up, Batman Returns. I can hear some of you just screaming at your device right now, but number 26 is Batman Returns. Why is Batman Returns number 26? Because while I do think it's a pretty great Tim Burton movie, it's not a good Batman movie. It is a wildly divergent Batman movie. It is very divergent from the source material. Like, for starters, it's like someone looked at Batman's Rogues Gallery and was like, hey, which two Batman villains have the least mental illness? Oh, well, that's probably Penguin and Catwoman. Okay, what if we gave them the most mental illness? And, throw in physical deformity and superpowers. They don't have any of that stuff in the comics. We're doing it anyways, because it's more Tim Burton-y. And that's the thing, is this movie is just ropes of Tim Burton jizz just launched all over Batman. It's also super weird because Batman does not have a moral code in this movie. Or does he? It's confusing because he spends like the majority of the film just like straight up murdering homeless circus performers. Pay attention, people. After he sets those people on fire or blows them up, they do not come back. They are dead. And then when Catwoman's like, I'm going to murder Max Schreck, a character who is not from the comics, but is played by Christopher Walken, who is a ruthless, evil billionaire trying to do some type of weird electricity scam. Bruce Wayne is like, oh no, you can't murder him. And it's like, why not? Why not, Bruce Wayne? Because he's rich? Like, seriously, Batman Returns feels like it's the movie where that terrible take about Batman not caring about social justice and just like beating up like mentally ill people. It's like it came from this movie. And that trope is dead wrong on Batman in so many ways. That being said, this is a wildly entertaining fever dream of a movie. It is worth watching for how fucking insane it is. Like I said, it's not a good Batman movie, but it is a good Tim Burton movie. Number 25, Suicide Squad. That's right. I put it at number 25. It is officially in the top 25. Why would I do that? Well, I would do that because I'm emotionally invested in the comic book that is Suicide Squad. And in spite of this movie's insane background story of constantly just throwing new demands and weird obstacles at David Ayer's production of the film, and then forcing reshoots, and then essentially giving us a theatrical cut that was a mishmash of two different versions of the film. It's amazing the film is as watchable as it is. And a big part of that is actually because of how much work David Ayers actually puts into properly portraying the characters. There's actually a sequence in this movie, an exchange of dialogue between Deadshot, played by Will Smith, and Joel Kinnaman's Is that who? I'm pretty sure that's who played Rick Flags. Exchange. They have an exchange in the movie, and it's the most perfect exchange I've ever heard between comic book characters in an adaptation. It is an exchange that perfectly illustrates their relationship in the comic books, where they're on the helicopter flying into the zone, and Deadshot says to Rick Flag, "Hey man, you're a soldier. I know you've gone to the dark places too." And Rick Flag looks at Deadshot and he says, "I'm a soldier. You're a serial killer who takes credit cards." And like that perfectly encapsulates their relationship in the comic books. I have a huge collection of Suicide Squad comics. Before this movie came out, I like almost collected the entire John Ostrander run in trade paperback form. I fucking love these comic books. And for all this movie's flaws, and it does have a lot of flaws, considering everything I just said about it, I still love this movie. I will say also, this is a great movie for drugs. You want to watch a superhero movie that's not too hard to follow on like psychedelic drugs? Suicide Squad, not a bad choice. Lots of weird edits and coloring choices that make that pay off. The movie also features a genuinely in my opinion, like when I watched this movie the first time, and I still get chills at the scene at the end where Deadshot saves the world. Like, I think that sequence is extremely well done. Honestly, I like the end of this movie better than the end of Joss Whedon's The Avengers. And you know what? I'm not just saying that because I fucking hate Joss Whedon. Number 24, Superman Returns. Superman Returns is actually good. That being said, it's too long. And it's also like every other Superman thing that came out between the Christopher Reeves movie and the most recent movies. A lot of Jesus in it. A lot of Jesus in it. For some reason, Warner Brothers, it's in Smallville too, by the way. For some reason, Warner Brothers was really like Superman and Jesus. There's the money. That being said, it is too long, and once again, Lex Luthor, here played by Kevin Spacey, who makes a very Lex Luthor, still trying to do a land scheme. That being said, it's not a bad continuation of the Christopher Reeves universe. Number 23, Blue Beetle. The movie's just fun. Just a fun ride. Honestly, it's solid. It's a good time. It's too bad it's not genuinely special in any particular way. It's just solid. Just a good time. It's only down here because it's just not as impactful as everything else. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. Honestly, I really enjoyed this movie. I know it has also a troubled production and was put through numerous edits. But honestly, I really enjoyed it. It's not incredible or great in any way, but it is a fun ride. And it's worth noting that Patrick Wilson makes a much better comic foil to Jason Momoa than Amber Heard as Mira ever did. That already makes that is technically one area where the movie is dramatically improved. The first movie tried to be funny in a lot of ways. This movie actually is funny. There's a big difference. I also thought it was cool they brought in the Curse of Crawdax finally, even though they left out a lot of details from the comics. But yeah, no, I actually enjoyed this. It is a funny, campy, good time. Not the greatest, but decent ride. Number 21, Constantine, starring Keanu Reeves. This is actually one of Keanu Reeves' best movies. It's not a spectacularly accurate representation of the comic book character, although the movie does have its moments of brilliance. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm referencing there. But the point is, this is a really good entertaining movie. It takes a lot of liberties with the source material, which is what's holding it back. But it's still one of Keanu Reeves' best movies. The Suicide Squad. I ranked it, even though on on an emotional level, I like David Ayer's the butchered cut of David Ayer's movie better than this film on a certain level. I have to admit that The Suicide Squad is the better constructed film because it hasn't been mutilated by the studio and they let James Gunn do what he wanted because James Gunn is a control freak. That being said, it's weird because in many ways, this movie had a much more Suicide Squad style plot, but the first movie had much more Suicide Squad characters. In fact, most of the people on the team in this movie, this is their first time ever being on the squad because they weren't on the squad in the comics. Although the comics would add Peacemaker to the squad while this movie was in production. They also changed a lot of the characters' powers. James Gunn does not give a shit about source material, which is why I'm very curious to see how his take on Superman will go. Because what James Gunn normally does is he takes unknown characters and tries to make the best story he can with a total disregard for the fine details of their backgrounds. He'll change powers and origins and anything if he thinks he can tell a story about it. And this movie's full of that. He changed his Ratcatcher. He changed his Peacemaker. Although Peacemaker is the least changed in this movie, he changed him more in the Peacemaker show. Bloodsport got a completely different set of powers. Polka Dot Man got completely different powers. Arguably, King Shark is the only one who's pretty comic accurate. Actually, no. Rick Flag is also great in this movie. Actually, the reason I get over most of my problems with this movie is because I do love Rick Flag, both in the comics and this movie. Number 19, The Flash. Yep, in spite of all its problems, because it does have some problems, mostly CGI and questionable edits made to, try and either be part of a reboot or not part of a reboot. The Flash has a solid emotional core and it hits a lot of beats that I liked. So it's here in the top 20. Number 18, Shazam, aka the really good Shazam movie. Now, like I said, the action is technically better in the second movie, even though it's partially better because it's just ripping off Batman v Superman at certain points. This first Shazam is overall the better movie. It just hits a lot better Shazam notes, and the emotional core of it is stronger. And this is before Zachary Levi became unbearably insufferable. Number 17, Batman. Yeah, no, the Tim Burton movie made the top 20. It's a great film. It's weird to watch it now because it is the birth of psychopath Batman. He kills people in this movie, by the way. Bombs an entire building full of thugs. Doesn't really seem to have a problem with murder. That's what I'm saying. That being said, it's still fun to watch. A lot of people, Michael Keaton is their favorite Batman. And don't get me wrong, he is certainly an entertaining Batman. He is a Batman who likes being Batman. But he is easily the most psychotic Batman. In fact, in Batman Returns, him and Catwoman outright talk about how they have split personality disorders, which not actually how that DID is. That's not how it works. The way it's portrayed in this movie is not how it works. But that's besides the point. This is a pretty solid movie if you don't mind having a short, fat Joker. Like his costume, they nailed, but like body type wise, Jack Nicholson. Not very jokery. Gets the solid mannerisms, though. Next up, number 16, Superman the movie. Despite its incredibly stupid ending, Superman the movie is a thoughtful, entertaining, artistic character examination of Superman. Like, it's not an action movie. It is paced very different. Superman the movie is just a lot more artistic than some of the other movies on this film. Like, there's a lot of sweeping, contemplative, just landscape shots in the movie. It's clear that Richard Donner was trying to do something very thoughtful, while also embracing some of the sillier aspects as well. And this is really what is lost in all the other Christopher Reeves movies, which is why this is definitively, in spite of its problems, the best Christopher Reeves Superman movie. In all the other Christopher Reeves Superman movies, the best thing you can say is, well, it's got Christopher Reeves in it. Christopher Reeves makes those movies better than they actually are. This is the only movie that is actually as good as Christopher Reeves is. That being said, it is paced very differently than modern superhero movies. And younger audiences may not get it. Number 15, surprise, it's Black Adam, bitch. That's right. I liked Black Adam. I think this movie is not as deep as some of the other movies, but honestly, I just thought it was fun. See, like the whole thing with Black Adam, I like the politics of this movie too. If that's like the whole anti-American hegemony thing, the fact that in the comics, Black Adam is kind of a fascist, but at the end of this movie, he rejects fascism, which was cool. It's not the best movie, but honestly, it's a lot of fun. And I love the Justice Society in it, and I love how they represent American hegemony in the movie. And it doesn't have the strongest villain, and it's got some other issues. But honestly, I like Black Adam a lot. It's not for everyone, but I liked it. Number 14, Aquaman. Sorry, that sounded like I said Aquaman, but it's Aquaman. Aquaman, I enjoyed this movie. Now, I will say that this movie, the reason it's not higher is because it does have a lot of failed humor. Amber Heard, just not a great foil. Not a great foil to Jason Momoa's Aquaman. And some of the jokes try a little hard and are cheesy. And then on top of that, I don't agree with all the musical choices that were made in this movie. That being said, it has some epic action. And honestly, I thought that the emotional core of the film worked and drew me in as a viewer personally. Now, to be fair, this movie did look a lot more impressive before Avatar 2 came out. Number 13, Birds of Prey, or The Fantabulous Emancipation of Harley Quinn. Let's be honest, it's a Harley Quinn movie. And honestly, I love this movie. It's a lot of fun. It has great action in it. Some of it directed by the guy who did John Wick. The movie itself is directed by Kathy Yang. This is a good time. Now, I will say that it does have a little bit of that DC adaptation curse. What do I mean? I mean, it's one of those other DC properties where like some characters are like super comic book accurate, like Harley and the Huntress, very on point comic book wise. But then they have people like Cassandra Cain in here who is not comic book accurate at all. So it's like all over the place. Also, I'm really surprised they never addressed the fact that Renee Montoya is a lesbian. I mean, like in the comics, that's canon, but it's never brought up here. Number 12, Joker. In spite of some of the issues I have with this movie, I think Joker is a damn good Joker time. That being said, I'm going to disagree with a lot of people here who think that the Joker element is unnecessary. And I'm going to tell you, I have the exact opposite feeling. Without Joker, this movie is trash. Allow me to explain. So if this movie wasn't about the Joker, it would just make people with disabilities and mental health issues look dangerous and bad. The thing that makes this movie acceptable is that it is the backstory for the Joker. If this was just a movie about a guy with mental illness losing it and murdering people on television, that would just be bad. But as a story about the Joker, this shit works. Number 11, just missed my top 10, Watchmen. Obviously, watch the director's or ultimate cuts of this film. The only reason it's not higher is because the film does contain a couple changes to the story that I just don't think work that well. That being said, Zack Snyder himself has said that if he redid it, he would make it more like the comic book. Apparently, it was mostly the studio who pushed for changes. Number 10, Lego Batman. It's funny. It's a good old romp. but also it focuses on certain elements of Batman's characters that we just really haven't seen addressed in other movies. Specifically, Batman's tendency towards building new families and his fear of those families. Good time. Number 9, Batman Mask of the Phantasm. Now, many people would actually point to this as being the perfect Batman movie, and those people don't necessarily read comic books. That being said, it is damn close to the perfect Batman comic, the perfect Batman movie. It was released in theaters where it bombed, unfortunately, and then would find new life on VHS. Now, most Batman fans know it as one of the greatest Batman movies ever made because it kind of is. That being said, I have to dock points from anything that validates the Jack Nicholson version of Joker's origin. Hate that. It's not entirely the reason it's at number 9 instead of, number 1. But yeah, still great. Still great. Absolutely. Highly recommend. Honestly, here's another thing. Most of the stuff in the top 10, I have moved around numerous points in my mind, okay? So like this is my top 10 right now, but if any part of this list is going to change, it's probably going to be the top 10 cuz some days I feel differently about some of these movies and I think they're all great. Number 8, Man of Steel. I love this movie. One of my favorite Superman movies. I know a lot of people don't like this movie. I don't understand that. I find this movie inspiring. Like it shows humanity and all its struggles. It shows Superman and all his struggles. I dig it. Okay? I think this movie is great. It's like if Superman 2 hadn't aged like milk. In fact, this movie still looks good today. The CGI is stunning. Number 7, Batman Begins, also known as the movie that all current comic book movies are loosely basing their formula on. Batman Begins changed the game. It took it seriously, but was also fun enough. Sure, the story's got a couple weird elements in it, thanks to probably David Goyer, but it's fucking Christopher Nolan, and he's fucking delivers. This movie changed comic book movies forever. Number 6, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Obviously, I'm talking about the Ultimate Edition here. Let's forget the theatrical cut exists. I'm going to recommend the Ultimate Edition to you. Why? Because it contains a lot of context that's missing from the theatrical cut, and this is a dense-ass movie. This is like the Citizen Kane of superhero movies in terms of how much it's trying and doing all at the same time. Definitely watch the 3-hour version because it's better. The theatrical cut cuts out a bunch of Superman. In fact, it cuts out some really important Superman moments that kind of paint Superman differently without those moments. So, like, yeah, no, definitely Ultimate Edition this movie. There are some people who would put this at number 1. And some days I do feel that way. I know it's highly divisive and a lot of people hate this movie. I love this movie. Not the theatrical cut, the Ultimate Edition. Love it. I understand this movie better every time I watch it. There's so many goddamn layers to this movie. It's amazing. Number 5, The Dark Knight Rises. Finally, redemption for Bane. Sure, he doesn't look like the comic book version of Bane, but at least he's smart as hell. And I know what you're going to say. But Talia al Ghul was running everything. And to which I respond with, bitch, that's like saying, I'm mad that the general wasn't the president. It's like, the argument you're making doesn't even make sense, you fascist. But this movie completes the Nolan trilogy. Is it a shame that it has no Heath Ledger? Yeah, it's a shame. But there's nothing I can do about that. But that being said, it's got Bane and Catwoman. A better version than Michelle Pfeiffer's. I'm sorry. I don't like Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman. I don't. I never have. Deal with it. But she's so hot in her BDSM costume. I don't know, man. She's not Catwoman to me. Not at all. Catwoman doesn't have powers and isn't insane. Number 4, Wonder Woman. Honestly, there's an argument for this being one of the best superhero movies ever made. It's honestly fantastic. I get choked up at a lot of the war scenes. It's a really good movie. Are there some questionable choices that were made at the ending of the movie, yes. Would I like to see the original ending for the movie? I would. I would like to see the original ending for the movie. Also, side note, Warner Brothers, release the Ayer cut of Suicide Squad, you bastards. Just release it. Let us see it. Let us decide if it's better. But Wonder Woman, killer. Love it. 100% recommend. Number 3, The Batman, also the most Batman movie ever made. It captures a lot of stuff missing from other Batman movies. I love this movie. It's fantastic. I can't wait for part 2. Robert Pattinson is... He steals the show. I mean, you can't really say he steals the show because he is the main character. Never mind. That didn't make sense. The relationships he has with Catwoman and Commissioner Gordon are some of the best parts of the movie. Also, I don't know if Robert Pattinson is the best Batman, but he is the Batman doing the best acting. And I don't know how to explain the difference there. Number 2, The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight is here. Some days this is number 1 because it is outstanding. And not just because of Heath Ledger's performance. The way it ties into the other Christopher Nolan Batman movies is fantastic. I love this movie. This movie is a classic. Well worth your attention. Now, but if you know me, you're noticing that there's a movie that I haven't talked about yet. And it's going to be some of you that were like, really, Ruben? Really? And yes, the answer is this. Zack Snyder's Justice League is my number 1 DC movie. I'm sorry. I am the world's biggest Justice League fan. I love the Justice League. It's one of my favorite comic books of all time. And I like things to be a little bit more serious. I like things to have a little bit more edge. To me, that makes it more meaningful. Zack Snyder's Justice League is one of my favorite movies of all time. I have watched it more than probably every other movie on this list. And the only other movie that comes close is probably The Dark Knight Rises. I love Zack Snyder's Justice League. A lot of people are going to say, how? Why? And honestly, maybe I'll make an episode on that. Because I can't just break down why I love this 4-hour movie at this point in this video. It would take too much time. But it is my number 1. And if that inspires you to watch it, I don't know if you necessarily need to see the movies to build into it, but I do actually recommend seeing at least Man of Steel and Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice to build into it. Ultimate Edition, of course. But yeah. So, that is my top DC movies. Now, to be fair, I didn't rewatch all these movies before making the list. If I did, that might change some of the rankings around. But honestly, I love DC Comics and I love these movies. And those are my basic, that's where my ranking stands right now. Is that. A lot of people like older comic book movies, but honestly, they've gotten better. At some point, intelligence, imagination, and technology all caught up to around the same level, when previously they were kind of all over the place. Well, anyways, thank you for tuning into Ruben Uncut. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please follow on Spotify and like and subscribe and comment and share on YouTube. If you would like to contact the show, you can email me at rubenuncut@gmail.com. Once again, thank you for tuning in. I hope you have a wonderful whatever, wherever, whenever, whoever you are.